Good morning, everybody. Good to see your smiling faces on this chilly morning. I want to start off with a question. When was the most stressed you have ever been? Can you bring to mind the time that you were the most stressed that you have ever been? I mean, can you remember a time that you felt like you were so under it that you might never, ever come out? Like off the charts stress. Most of us can probably identify that, bring to mind something like that. A lot of us have experienced some work stresses, whether it's deadlines that you had to face, maybe some quotas that you had to fulfill, maybe a very, very badly timed surprise at work. That's happened to some of us. How many here have ever waited tables in your career? Okay, a whole bunch of us, okay? There have been times, I bet, when you've gotten so far in the weeds, you think that you're just not going to recover. And it's just very stressful. And I did that for quite a while. And then some of us would actually dream about waiting tables after a shift like that and wake up stressed all over again. It's no fun. For a while, I remember I worked at a restaurant for 9 years, so I know what it was like. I would wake up in a panic, like sweating, because I had to get conch fritters to some table at 7 o'clock in the morning, apparently. But I also remember getting a call from the senior pastor's office, his assistant, his executive assistant, back when I worked at Calvary Assembly many years ago. She called me very late on a Saturday afternoon, and she says, Pastor Clark has lost his voice. So he just said, you need to speak tomorrow morning. Which is very stressful because I usually take all week prepping for a Sunday message. But then she said, but not just speak. His outline is already in the bulletin. The graphics are already loaded in the computer. And all the life groups in the church have their discussion questions in the bulletin for all of their groups. And it's all based on his message. So you have to speak a message that utilizes all that stuff tomorrow morning in front of 2,000 people and on TV. And you wonder why I have gray hair. So we've all had our harder experiences with stress, I have no doubt. But here's the question. Does Jesus get that? Does he understand us? Does he get it when we come to those kinds of stresses in our lives, those experiences? Or did he just kind of float above it all, kind of protected by his glowing halo? Well, the answer is yes, he does get us. And no, there was no halo and no floating that went on in Jesus' life. He took on our experiences as a human, all of them, just like Brian just read, all of them. One night, Jesus experienced overwhelming stress because he knew he was about to face arrest and torture and then execution. Can you imagine all that, knowing that all that was coming? And it had been building, it had been coming for quite some time, but it's getting closer and closer. And now it was imminent. The nightmare of Jesus' life was about to begin. Now, like many people do when they're stressed, Jesus escaped to a quiet place, kind of a favorite place. It was a garden of old-growth olive trees, kind of set on the side of a mountain nearby. And he brought some of his close friends for some emotional support and prayer. And it had been a very long day already, and these guys did not really comprehend what was about to happen. So it's late, and they're all exhausted, and his friends could not stay awake as Jesus asked them to do. So Jesus went off and he pleaded with his Father God all by himself, just asking if there could be another way around what was about to happen. But ultimately, he knew that the die was cast and that there was no other way around this moment. He needed to bear this cross, literally. Now, Jesus says in Matthew 26:38, he says, my soul is grieved to the point of death, he says. My soul is grieved to the point of death. That's how he described how he felt. He reportedly suffered what they call hematohydrosis, which is a rare condition caused by extreme emotional stress. What happens is the sweat glands in his head ruptured, causing them to excrete blood. He was so clearly rocked by what he was facing, what he knew was right ahead of him. And it was right in that very garden on that night that the people who hated him would arrest him. And yet Jesus found the strength to face his accusers and submit to them willingly and without violence. He also knew that his death would catapult his message of radical love, and the resurrection that would soon take place afterwards would change how humanity would relate to God forever. It would change everything forever. So yes, Jesus understands our stress. He gets it. He faced the issues that we face, and obviously some far more severe than we ever will. But he also taught us how to deal with the stresses and the challenges of life. And the key to what he taught is really very, very simply this. Very first, to believe that God cares for you. It's so simple, but it's so primary, to believe that God actually cares for you. Jesus he kind of started by addressing our belief systems. Now, your belief system has nothing at all to do with your skin color or your appearance or your talents or your age. Your belief system is not concerned at all with the exterior of the tent, just the interior. So like the tent poles of your life are the set of convictions that you live by, what you really believe. They probably aren't posted anywhere, but they are the beliefs upon which your faith depends. If your belief system is strong, then you will stand. But if your belief system is weak, then the storms of life will prevail. Now, here's the truth. Belief always precedes behavior. You will live what you believe. Whether it's what you profess to believe or not, what you really believe, you will live. And for this reason, the Apostle Paul, in each of his letters, he addresses convictions before he addresses behaviors. To change the way that the person responds to life, change the way a person thinks about life and what they believe about life. The most important thing about you is your belief system. And Paul's was rock solid, like Gibraltar strong. So, if we were to take a close look at the tent poles of Paul's life, you would see this inscription on each of the poles. The sovereignty of God. He believed in the sovereignty of God. Say that with me. The sovereignty of God. Sovereignty is simply the term that the Bible uses to describe God's perfect management of the universe. He preserves and he governs every element. He's continually involved in all created things, directing them to act in a way that fulfills and brings about his purposes. Now, in the treatment of anxiety, a proper understanding of sovereignty is huge, because anxiety is often the consequence of perceived chaos. You believe chaos is actually happening around you. If we sense that we are victims of unseen random forces, then we get stressed out. We just do. Listen, psychologists learned some fascinating things about belief systems when they were studying the impact of combat upon soldiers in World War II. They determined that after 60 days of continuous combat, the ground troops became what they called emotionally dead. Emotionally dead, kind of zombie-like, which is kind of understandable, because soldiers endure a constant threat of bomb blitzes and machine guns and minefields and enemy snipers. So their anxiety is not very surprising. It's understandable. The comparative calm of fighter pilots, however, was kind of surprising, because their mortality rate was among the highest in all of combat. 50% of them were killed in action, yet the dogfighters, they loved their work. An astounding 93% of them said that they were very, very happy in their assignments, even though the odds of them giving their lives was literally the flip of a coin. So what made the difference? The pilots had their hands on the throttle. They were the ones that were in the cockpit. They felt like their fate was theirs to determine. Now, the infantrymen on the ground, however, could just as easily be killed standing still or even running away. They felt like they were helpless and exposed. Now, so the formula coming out of it is pretty simple. Perceived control creates calm. Lack of control gives birth to fear. You don't need a war to prove that formula. Traffic will work just fine. There was a team of German researchers that found that road congestion increases your chance of a heart attack threefold. It makes sense. Gridlock is the ultimate loss of control. You have no control over it. We may know how to drive, but the idiot in the next lane has no idea, obviously. We might be the best driver in history, but the teenager texting next to me puts my life on the roulette wheel. Or at least it seems that way. All that creates stress. Anxiety increases as perceived control decreases. So what do we do? Do we try to control everything? Is that the answer? Just control everything? How far do you go with that? Never board a plane without a parachute? Never go to a restaurant without bringing your own clean silverware in with you? Never leave the house without a gas mask? Never step on a crack lest you break your mother's back? I mean, how far do you take this thing? Where does it end? I mean, taking control, if only we could, really. Here's the actual truth. Certainty is a cruel imposter. It is. You cannot control outcomes. You just can't. A person can accumulate millions of dollars and just lose it in a recession. A health fanatic can eat only nuts and veggies for their whole life and still battle cancer. A hermit can withdraw completely from human contact and still suffer from insomnia. We want certainty, but the only certainty is the lack thereof. That's why the most stressed out people in the world are control freaks, because they fail at the quest they most pursue. The more they try to control the world, the more they realize that they cannot. And life becomes a cycle of anxiety and failure, and anxiety and failure, and anxiety and failure. We can't take control because control is not ours to take. The Bible has a better idea than all that. It really does. Rather than seeking total control, you can just give it up. You can give all of it up. You can't run the world, but you can trust it to God. And this is the idea that Paul is trying to convey in this simple little phrase that he speaks in Philippians 4:4, where he says, rejoice in the Lord. He's not just saying ignore reality and sing a happy tune. He's saying rejoice in the Lord. He's saying peace is within reach, not for a lack of problems, but because of the presence of an almighty sovereign God. Rather than rehearse the chaos of the world, just rejoice in the Lord's sovereignty, like Paul did. Look what he writes in the first chapter of Philippians, starting in verse 12. He says, I want you to know, he's in jail here, by the way. He says, I want you to know that everything that's happened to me here has helped to spread the good news. For everyone here, including the whole palace guard, knows that I am in chains because of Christ. And because of my imprisonment, most of the believers here have gained confidence and boldly speak God's message without fear. So, God's answer for troubled times has always been the same. It's to remember that heaven has an occupied throne. It's not empty. It is occupied. And that was certainly the message that God gave to the prophet Isaiah. Because way back in the 8th century BC, ancient Judah enjoyed a time of real peace, thanks to the steady leadership of the king at that time, who was King Uzziah. Uzziah was far from perfect, yet for a long time, he kept the enemies at bay. There were antagonists that were threatening from all sides of their nation, but the presence of King Uzziah there kept their fragile society safe for 52 years, which is a long time in the ancient world. But then King Uzziah dies. He dies. And then the prophet Isaiah, who lived during that time, he is left there with plenty of reasons to start worrying. What's going to happen to the people of Judah? What happens now that King Uzziah, the one who brought peace and security, he's all gone? So what happens now? We could kind of relate this to ourselves, to you. What happens now that your job is gone? What happens when your health is fading? What happens when the economy takes a nosedive? Does God have a message for his people when calamity strikes? Well, he certainly had a word for Isaiah. Look what he says to Isaiah in chapter 6. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord. I saw the Lord. Say those words with me. I saw the Lord. Everything changes when you see God, doesn't it? Everything changes. At least it should. Here's what he says. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above it stood seraphim. Each one had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one cried to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. The whole earth is filled with his glory. So Uzziah's throne was empty, but God's was occupied. Uzziah's reign had ended, but God certainly had not. Uzziah's voice had been silenced, but God was speaking loud and clear. He was, and he is, and still is, alive and on the throne and worthy of endless worship. God calmed the fears of Isaiah, not by removing the problems, but just by reminding him of an almighty, sovereign, powerful God. And he was in control. Think of it this way. Imagine for a moment that your father is a world-renowned orthopedic surgeon. Just imagine that for a moment. People travel from all over the world to come and be treated by your father. And it's a daily occurrence for him to take damaged joints and to switch them out for brand new ones. Hips and knees, shoulders and stuff. He replaces that kind of stuff with ease all the time. It's what he does. And say you're just a 12-year-old child and you don't really understand all the accomplishments of a renowned surgeon. But you're not too young to stumble down the front steps and twist your ankle, and you're writhing around the floor in pain, screaming out because it hurts so bad. But then it gets even worse because you remember that you're only 2 weeks away from your very, very first school dance. So you start freaking out. You're thinking, this is no time for crutches. This is no time for limping. I need a healthy ankle. You can't even imagine being banished to the outer rim of the gymnasium, looking on because you may never recover from that. So he's freaking out, but into the room walks your dad, still wearing his surgical scrubs. He walks in and takes off your shoe and peels back your sock and examines the injury. And you groan as you see the big knot on the side of your ankle. So adolescent anxiety kicks in. You go, Dad, I am never going to walk again. He goes, yes, you will. You will. Nobody can help me. He says, I can. No, nobody can help me. You can. Look at it. It's terrible. And your dad looks at you and says, do you not know what I do? Don't you understand what I do? And actually, you don't. You're only 12. You don't get it. You don't know the power that he has, the ability that he has. You just know that he goes to the hospital every day. You know that some people call him doctor. You know that your mom thinks he's smart, at least sometimes. You really don't know what your father can do. So he puts a bag of ice on your ankle and says, maybe it's time that you learn. So the very next day, his dad's parked in the parking lot of the school when he's done with classes. He says, hop in, I want you to see what I do. And he drives you to his hospital offices and brings you inside, shows you a wall that's filled with diplomas. Interesting. Next to them is a collection of awards, all kinds of awards, with words like honorable and distinguished and stuff like that. Then he hands you a manual of orthopedic surgery, and it's got his name on it. And you say, you wrote this? He goes, yes, I did. Yes, I did. Then his cell phone rings, and after a couple quick exchanges, he says, okay, we're off to surgery now. I want you to come with me. So you get to scrub up and go into the operating room with him on your crutches to sit back and watch. And for the next 2 hours, you have box seats to a surgery, a procedure, where he reconstructs an ankle. He's the emperor of the operating room. He never hesitates, doesn't seek advice. He just does what he does. And at one point, one of the nurses leans over to you and goes, your dad is the best. He's the best. So later on, as the two of you ride home in the car that evening, you look at your father and you see him in a little bit of a different light. You figure, well, I guess if he can do orthopedic surgery, he can probably take care of a swollen ankle, and I'll be all right. So you ask him, you think I'm going to be okay for the dance? He says, yeah, you're going to be just fine. You're going to be just fine. But this time you believe him. You believe him. Your anxiety decreases as your understanding of your father increases. So, do you think it's possible that all of our greatest fears are just swollen ankles to God? I mean, that means that a lot of people live with a lot of unnecessary worries, all concerned over temporary limps. He's very, very capable of looking after his children. So the next time we are tempted to fear the future, let's just rejoice in God's sovereignty, can we? Rejoice in what he's already accomplished. Rejoice that he's able to do what you and I can never do. Let's fill our minds with thoughts of God, the one who holds it all in his very, very capable hands. Great author Max Lucado put it this way. He said, One arch of his eyebrow and 1,000,000 angels will pivot and salute. Every throne is a footstool to his. Every crown is paper mache next to his. He consults no advisors. He needs no Congress. He reports to no one. He is in charge. Others see the problems of the world and wring their hands. We see the problem of the world and bend our knees. So let's go back to the original question today. When was the most stressed out you have ever been? The most stressed out. Even in the times of our highest potential stress, we can experience peace. Not because of the removal of all of our problems, but because of a peace that passes all understanding. Peace in the midst of the storms of life, whatever it is that you're going through. He really does get us. He understands our stress, but he offers a way to live beyond that stress. Not subject to it, not under it, but above it, beyond it. Able to handle the situations of life without freaking out. Our world needs those kinds of people. Our families need that kind of person. Our business, our office area needs that type of person. Our circles of friends need those kind of people who can rest in the sovereignty of God and not freak out. And with God's help, we can become those kinds of people. Do you believe that? Then you believe in the power of God at work in your life. You believe in the power of sovereign God